It's well known that China is intent on isolating Taiwan from the international community, but those efforts didn't stop a Canadian delegation of former security and defense officials from visiting the self-governing island. The meetings last week were meant to strengthen informal ties between Canada and Taiwan. The visit sends a clear message to China that the delegates care about Taiwan. The delegation included former CSIS Director Richard Fadden and former Vice Chief of Defense Staff of the Canadian Armed Forces, retired Vice Admiral Mark Norman. They both join me now. Gentlemen, good to see you. Thanks for coming in today.
Good to be back.
You.
So Richard Fadden, this trip was not officially sanctioned by the Canadian government because Canada has no formal diplomatic relationship with Taiwan. So how did you end up leading this delegation of former security and defense officials to meet with the Taiwan government?
Well, I would take the word lead loosely, but in any event, most of us have had some interest in how Canada treats Taiwan over the years. We've had discussions with the Taiwan mission in Canada, and one of the ways that they thought we could reinforce our understanding of what's happening is to have us visit Taiwan. Much like there's a media visit, there was a parliamentarians visit. We had, 3 or 4 former senior military people, a few academics, and a few old diplomats. And the idea was to improve our capacity to comment on China-Taiwan relations.
What did you learn from the visit? What understanding did you gain that you didn't have before you went there?
I think the main thing from my perspective was that Taiwan is an extremely vibrant democracy, very powerful economy, and is heading in that direction. At the same time, China is going in the opposite direction. Its economy is beginning to look very, very bad indeed. And it is becoming more and more autocratic, more 1984-ish, and they're sort of crossing in the night. And what I found the most depressing is that the status quo that gave us the relationship with Taiwan a few years ago is no longer. We're allowing China to move forward on a whole number of fronts, including in Canada, but in the South China Seas, with the Philippines and elsewhere, and we're not pushing back. I think that was the thing that was reinforced the most with me.
So you say we, do you mean Canada or do you mean the West writ
I mean
large?
Canada in particular, but I think you could argue a lot of Western countries similarly. But we are probably amongst the shyest.
Interesting. So Mark Norman, Canada hasn't recognized Taiwan as a sovereign state since 1970 when former Prime Minister Trudeau changed the diplomatic relationship. Was there any conversation about shifting it back or strengthening it or formally recognizing Taiwan while you were there with the government?
Yeah, the officials we met with were very diplomatic, but at the same time, their arguments were quite compelling with respect to the fact that they feel politically and diplomatically isolated. And this is playing right into the coercion and intimidation by the PRC. They never came out explicitly and said, they wanted X or they wanted Y, but the underlying messages were that they appreciated what we were doing. For an example, the transiting of Canadian naval ships through the Strait of Taiwan to them was an extremely important and visible commitment to their efforts. But they also inferred that they would like to be recognized more fully in multi-partisan organizations, and that any efforts that Canada could pursue, both with respect to Taiwan-Canada relations, but more globally as an influential power to try and help their case would be genuinely welcome.
So what would that look like? The World Trade Organization, the UN, things like this, a more formal recognition, a more formalized role for Taiwan?
Yeah, and some of the trade arrangements that are being discussed in Indo-Pacific, certainly those are opportunities. And they don't have to be formally sanctioned UN entities. They could be small bilateral or multilateral entities that achieve the same effect, but provide Taiwan opportunities to engage on a more formal basis, because they're being squeezed and they're being intimidated and isolated, and they're very mindful of that.
That's true enough, and I agree entirely. But when the UN changed which country represented China a few decades ago, that's what they did. They changed Beijing for Taiwan. They did not say, in any shape, way, or fashion, the resolution did not say that Taiwan couldn't join the WHO or the ICAO, the specialized agency. What it did change was the membership on the Security Council and representation in the General Assembly. So I would argue, adding on to what Mark said, Our one China policy, which we have had in place for quite a while, has a number of rules. You know, for example, the Governor General, the PM, and a few other people can't go to Taiwan because it would mean we recognize them as a head of state.
Right.
But it seems that over the years we've come to be very reticent. Ministers can't go, deputy ministers can't go. So I think, you know, to add a little bit to what Mark was saying, what they were saying is, you're not saying to China we want an independent Taiwan when we reinforce relationships on cyber, on trade. The Americans, I think there are over 20 states have representation in Taiwan. We have 2. And we're very, very reticent to accommodate any sort of shift or building on the relationship we have, which I think Mark and I would say we could do without enraging China and without violating the one China policy.
Well, and the PRC are exploiting that, and to Dick's point. That they know it, they see it, and they're exploiting it on a day-to-day basis and basically driving a wedge between Taiwan and its potential partners by making a whole lot of noise at both ends. And I think we can do more. We should do more. They're looking for help. They're looking for friends, and they need them. They're in a tough place, and it's looking worse.
Well, a tough place, Mark Norman. I mean, the United States has said several times that China is aiming to have the capacity to capture and annex Taiwan, maybe as soon as 2027. I mean, what can a country like Canada do staring down a situation like that? I mean, what needs to happen to avoid this possible outcome, do you think?
Yeah, well, as a retired military guy, perhaps it pains me to say we don't look at it necessarily as a military issue. We look at it as a diplomatic and economic issue. Certainly the military nexus to this is undeniable, and the Chinese are using their military might in the region to bully and intimidate Taiwan. And of course, Taiwan's doing everything they can to prepare themselves. Reliable supply chains, training, relationships with respect to how they prepare themselves, societal resilience, cyber, all of these things are contributing to their ability to both deter the PRC and to potentially sustain an attack should it actually transpire.
Does that deter the PRC, though, Richard Fadden?
I absolutely think it contributes to that. But what deters them, I think, equally is that if China were to invade Taiwan, it would really, really worry Japan, which is not very far away. It would worry the Philippines. It would worry Vietnam. It would worry a variety of other countries. That would shift, I think, power relationships and the concerns about China, not only in the region, but throughout the world. I'd argue that what China is trying to do is intimidate, as Mark says. They don't intend to invade Taiwan tomorrow because it would significantly affect how the world views them. With their economy going down the tube and with a variety of other factors, I think they want to keep, broadly speaking, the status quo while slowly crunching Taiwan. Cyber attacks, multiple military and naval outings around the island. Out-and-out invasion? Mark is the expert, not me. I'm told an amphibious invasion from Taiwan sounds easier than it really is to effect. So if you add all of that together, they're right to be worried. They're right to build their resilience. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow, which I think builds the argument or supports the argument Mark and I are making for reinforcing our relations.
But we collectively got Ukraine wrong. Many of us were surprised that Putin actually crossed the line. Now, with that said, this is a different geographic and military scenario than it would be in Ukraine. But nonetheless, there's no doubt that the Chinese are building forces. They're building the capability. As Dick said, they're demonstrating it on a daily basis. But I think my bigger concern would be what I would characterize as a virtual invasion or a virtual takeover through a variety of subversive methods, perhaps grabbing some of their outer islands and undermining their democracy, creating public, lack of confidence in the government. All of these things will contribute to how they would see themselves potentially annexing the country in a slightly different way. Invading it, and we were talking hundreds of thousands of people would be needed. And the Taiwanese, although they're still building their armed forces, they're quite capable. And I don't think it would be a cakewalk for the PRC at all.
Okay, the question I was going to ask, though, was about Ukraine. And just as a final point, Mark Norman, I mean, the West has responded to help Ukraine deal with Russia. but it's been incremental. It's been slow. It hasn't been at scale early enough in the conflict, a lot of people would say, and Putin just keeps going, right? It's undeterred. I mean, when you look at how the West has responded to what Russia is doing, depending on what happens November 5th in the United States, how do you think the West could respond to China should they decide to go with the option?
Yeah, well, there's pros and cons to the analogy or the comparison. NATO is a key component to the discussion, and of course there isn't a similar formal alliance structure. But as Dick pointed out, there are a number of friends, allies, and neighbors in the region who are important to the global economy, and for reasons of humanitarian rule of law, et cetera, are important to us as a democracy. But I think, to your point, how do you avoid the incremental approach? You have the conversations before the inevitable or before the bullets start flying, because if they do, then it's too late and then everybody's in a crisis.
Okay, gentlemen, we could talk about this for hours, but we're out of time. I want to thank you for coming in, Mark Norman, Richard Fadden. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you.
Thanks, Dave.